The sun was setting over the small Virginia town as the Army colonel drove down the main road. He had just finished a long day at the military base where he worked. His green uniform still had dust on it from the training exercises he had been leading all afternoon. He was tired and ready to get home to his family. The colonel had served his country for 22 years. He had been to war zones overseas. He had led hundreds of soldiers through dangerous missions. He had medals and awards displayed in his office at the base. Today had been a normal Tuesday, nothing special, just another day of training young soldiers and attending meetings. As he drove through the quiet streets, he noticed flashing blue and red lights behind him. The colonel looked at his speedometer. He was not speeding. He checked his mirrors and signals. Everything was working fine. He tried to think if he had done anything wrong. Did he forget to use his turn signal? Did he roll through a stop sign? He could not think of anything. The police car stayed right behind him with its lights flashing bright. The colonel knew he needed to pull over. He looked around for a safe spot. The street was dark with no streetlights. There were trees on both sides. He did not feel comfortable stopping there. Just ahead, he saw a gas station with bright lights. He decided to pull into the parking lot where it was safe and well lit. He put on his turn signal and slowly pulled into the gas station. He parked his car away from the gas pumps in an empty spot. The police car followed him and stopped right behind his vehicle. The colonel took a deep breath. He had been pulled over a few times in his life. He knew what to do. He put the car in park and turned off the engine. He kept both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. 2 police officers got out of their car. The colonel watched them in his side mirror. They were walking toward his car, but something seemed different. They were walking fast, almost running. One officer had his hand on his gun. The other officer was pointing at the colonel's car and saying something to his partner. The lead officer reached the driver's side window. He was a white man in his 30s with short brown hair. His face looked angry. The colonel rolled down his window and prepared to hand over his license and registration. But before he could say anything, the officer started yelling, "Get out of the car right now," the officer screamed. The colonel was confused. This was not how traffic stops usually went. "Sir, can you tell me what I did wrong?" he asked calmly. "I said get out of the car." The officer yelled even louder. His face was turning red. "I will, sir, but can you please tell me why you stopped me?" the colonel asked. He kept his voice calm and respectful. His military training had taught him how to stay cool under pressure. The second officer came to the passenger side of the car. He was younger, maybe in his 20s. He also had his hand on his gun. The colonel could see both officers clearly now. They both looked very angry, but he did not understand why. "Keep your hands where I can see them," the lead officer shouted. "Yes, sir, my hands are on the steering wheel," the colonel replied. He showed his palms, keeping them flat on the wheel. "I said get out of the car," the officer screamed again. "Sir, I want to comply, but you are giving me different commands," the colonel said. His heart was starting to beat faster. "You told me to keep my hands visible, but you also want me to get out. How would you like me to do that safely?" The officer's face got even redder. He stepped closer to the window. "Are you refusing my orders?" he asked in a dangerous voice. "No, sir, I just want to understand what you want me to do," the colonel explained. He was a trained leader. He knew that unclear commands in tense situations led to mistakes. People got hurt when orders were confusing. Across the parking lot, a young woman had just finished pumping gas into her car. She heard the yelling and looked over. She saw the police car with its lights flashing. She saw the officers standing on both sides of a vehicle. She saw one officer with his hand on his gun. Something did not look right to her. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app. Her hands were shaking a little, but she started recording. She was far enough away that the officers did not notice her, but her phone camera was good enough to see and hear everything clearly. Back at the colonel's car, the situation was getting worse. The lead officer pulled out his pepper spray and held it up. "You see this? Things are going to get worse for you if you don't do what I say right now." The colonel felt a chill run down his spine. He had faced enemy soldiers in combat. He had been in firefights overseas. But somehow this felt more frightening. At least in war he understood the rules. He knew who the enemy was and why they were fighting. Here on a quiet street in his own country, wearing his military uniform, he had no idea what was happening or why. "Sir, I'm an Army colonel," he said, hoping this information would calm the situation. I am not trying to cause any problems. I just want to understand why you stopped me. I don't care what you are, the officer shouted back. You are going to do what I tell you. The second officer moved his hand to his gun holster. He unclipped the safety strap. The colonel saw this movement in his passenger side mirror. His breath caught in his throat. This was serious. This was dangerous. These officers were treating him like a criminal, like someone who had done something terrible. Please, sir, the colonel said. His voice was still calm, but there was a new tone in it now. It was fear. I am happy to cooperate. Just please tell me what you want me to do, step by step, and I will do it. People were starting to come out of the gas station store. They saw the commotion and stopped to watch. The woman with the phone kept recording. She made sure to capture everything, the officers, the car, and especially the uniform she could see through the window. The lead officer leaned down close to the window. Put your hands out the window, slowly. Finally, a clear command. The colonel slowly moved his hands from the steering wheel. He extended them out the window, palms up, fingers spread. Like this, sir? Now open the door from the outside, the officer commanded. The colonel reached for the outside door handle carefully. Every movement was slow and deliberate. He did not want to give them any reason to use their weapons. He had trained hundreds of soldiers on how to stay alive in dangerous situations. Now he was using that same training to protect his own life. As he opened the door, the officer grabbed his arm roughly and pulled him out. The colonel stumbled but kept his balance. He was a tall man, in good shape from years of military fitness training. But he made himself small. He did not resist. He did not pull away. Turn around. Hands behind your back, the officer ordered. The colonel did as he was told. He felt handcuffs snap around his wrists. The metal was cold and tight. He had never been handcuffed in his life, even during his 22 years in the Army. Through all his deployments and missions, he had never been arrested or detained. Sir, can you please tell me what violation I committed? He asked one more time. The officer spun him around. Their faces were inches apart. The colonel could smell coffee on the officer's breath. He could see the anger in his eyes. But there was something else there too. Something that made the colonel's stomach turn. You were driving suspicious, the officer said, making erratic movements. The colonel's mind raced. He had not made any erratic movements. He had been driving straight down the road. He had used his turn signal to pull into the gas station. He had parked normally. Nothing about his driving had been suspicious or erratic. The woman with the phone moved a little closer. She wanted to make sure she got everything on video. She had a feeling this was important. Something about this whole scene felt wrong. She saw the uniform on the man in handcuffs. She heard him speaking respectfully while the officers shouted. Nothing made sense. Other people in the parking lot started pulling out their phones too. In today's world, everyone knew that recording police encounters was important. These videos told the truth when words could be denied later. The colonel stood there in handcuffs, his military uniform now wrinkled and dirty. His mind went to his wife at home. She would be wondering where he was. She would be worried. He thought about his 2 kids who looked up to him. What would they think when they learned their father had been treated this way? But mostly he wondered what he had done to deserve this treatment. And deep down, though he did not want to admit it yet, he knew the answer. The colonel stood in handcuffs beside his car. The metal cut into his wrists. He tried to adjust his hands to ease the pressure, but the cuffs were on too tight. The lead officer kept one hand on his pepper spray while talking into his radio. The second officer walked around the colonel's car, looking through the windows with a flashlight. Dispatch, we have the subject detained, the lead officer said into his radio. Running his plates now. The colonel listened carefully. They were running his license plates. That meant they had pulled him over without even knowing who he was or checking his information first. This made no sense. Why would they stop someone if they had not already run the plates to see if the car was stolen? Or if the driver had warrants? Sir, my license and registration are in the car, the colonel said. My military ID is in my wallet in my back pocket. The lead officer ignored him. He finished his radio call and walked over to the passenger side where his partner was still searching the car with his eyes. They talked quietly to each other. The colonel could not hear what they were saying, but he saw the second officer shrug and shake his head. By now, more than a dozen people were watching from different spots around the gas station. Most of them had their phones out. The woman who started recording first had not stopped. Her arms were getting tired from holding the phone up, but she kept it steady. She had a feeling this video was going to matter. The lead officer came back to where the colonel was standing. "Do you have any weapons in the vehicle?" he asked. "No, sir," the colonel replied. "Any drugs?" "No, sir." "Where are you coming from?" "I am coming from the military base. I work there." "I am stationed there," the colonel explained. He thought maybe if he told them more about who he was, they would realize they had made a mistake. "What were you doing there?" the officer demanded. "I work there, sir. I am an Army colonel. I was leading training exercises today." The officer's expression did not change. He did not seem impressed or concerned that he had handcuffed a high-ranking military officer. Instead, he seemed annoyed. "You work on the base?" the officer asked with doubt in his voice. "Yes, sir. For 22 years. I can show you my military ID if you would like." The officer stared at him for a long moment. Then he reached into the colonel's back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it and looked at the military ID card inside. The colonel watched his face, waiting for recognition, waiting for an apology, waiting for this nightmare to end. But the officer just closed the wallet and put it on the hood of the car. "That does not change anything," he said. The colonel felt his hope sink. In that moment, he understood that his rank, his service, his uniform meant nothing to this officer. He was not being treated this way because of something he had done. He was being treated this way because of who he was. The second officer joined them. He leaned close to his partner and whispered something. The lead officer nodded and then turned back to the colonel. "We are going to search your vehicle," he announced. "Can you tell me what you are looking for?" the colonel asked. "And can you tell me what traffic violation I committed?" "You were not displaying your license plate properly," the officer said. The colonel's mind raced. His license plate? He had just renewed his registration last month. The plates were clean and clearly visible. He had never had any issues with them before. "Sir, my plates are properly displayed. You can see them clearly. That is why you were able to follow me and run them," he said. The officer's face darkened. "Are you arguing with me?" "No, sir. I am just confused about what violation occurred." "You are making this worse for yourself," the officer warned. He pulled out his pepper spray again and held it up. "Do you see this? Do you want to ride the lightning? Because we can make that happen." The colonel knew what "ride the lightning" meant. It was slang for being tased. The officer was threatening to use a taser on him. His heart pounded in his chest. He took slow breaths, trying to stay calm. "Sir, I am cooperating fully," he said. "I have not resisted. I am in handcuffs. I just want to understand what is happening," a man from the crowd called out. "Hey, why is he in handcuffs?" "What did he do?" The lead officer spun around. "Stay back. This is police business," he shouted at the crowd. The people did not move back, but they stopped talking. The phones kept recording. The woman who had been filming from the beginning zoomed in to make sure she captured the officer's face and his badge number. The second officer opened the driver's door and started searching inside the car. He looked under the seats, in the glove compartment, in the center console. He found nothing. The colonel kept his car very clean and organized. It was a habit from the military. Everything had its place. "Vehicle is clear," the second officer reported. The lead officer seemed frustrated by this news. He had expected to find something, anything, that would justify this stop. But there was nothing. The car was clean. The driver had no warrants. He had not committed any real traffic violation. The officer knew he had a problem. "Where do you live?" he asked the colonel. The colonel gave his address. It was in a nice neighborhood about 15 minutes away. "Long way from the base," the officer commented. "It is about a 25-minute drive." "I make it every day," the colonel said. "What route do you usually take?" The colonel explained his normal route home. It was the most direct path from the base to his house. The route took him through this town. "Why did you pull into this gas station instead of stopping on the road?" the officer demanded. "For safety, sir. It was dark on the road with no lights. I wanted to stop somewhere well lit and public," the colonel explained. This was actually recommended practice. Police departments themselves often advised people, especially women, to pull into well-lit public areas if they felt unsafe stopping on a dark road. "So you think we are not safe?" the officer asked, his voice rising. "You think we would hurt you?" "I did not say that, sir. I just wanted to stop somewhere with good lighting." "Yeah, you should be afraid," the officer said quietly, but his voice carried. The woman with the phone caught it clearly on her recording. The colonel felt ice in his stomach. "You should be afraid." What kind of police officer says that to someone who has done nothing wrong? He had been respectful, cooperative, and calm. Yet here he was being threatened. More people had gathered now. The gas station clerk came out to see what was happening. An elderly couple pumping gas stopped to watch. A truck driver who had been inside buying coffee came out and immediately pulled out his phone to record. The lead officer noticed all the phones. He looked annoyed, but he could not do anything about it. People had the legal right to record police encounters in public spaces. The Supreme Court had confirmed this right years ago. "Take the cuffs off him," the second officer said quietly to his partner. "We do not have anything to hold him on." The lead officer hesitated. He did not want to let the colonel go. His ego would not allow him to admit this stop was a mistake. But his partner was right. They had no legal reason to keep him detained. Reluctantly, he walked behind the colonel and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal finally released from his wrists. The colonel brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists where red marks had formed. "You are free to go," the officer said, but his tone made it clear he was not happy about it. "Am I getting a ticket?" the colonel asked. "No, just go," the officer said. The colonel stood there for a moment. He wanted to ask more questions. He wanted to demand a supervisor. He wanted an explanation. But more than anything, he wanted to get home safely to his family. He decided that leaving was the smart choice right now. He got back into his car slowly. His hands were shaking as he reached for the seatbelt. He started the engine and checked all his mirrors. The police car was still parked right behind him, blocking him in. He waited. Finally, the officers got back in their car and backed up. The colonel carefully pulled out of the parking spot and drove away. He watched his speedometer carefully. He used every turn signal. He did not want to give them any reason to stop him again. As he drove away, the woman finally stopped recording. Her video was 43 minutes long. She looked at her phone screen, her hands still shaking. She knew what she had just witnessed, and she knew the world needed to see it. The colonel drove home in silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Every few seconds, he checked his rearview mirror to make sure the police car was not following him. His heart was still racing. He felt angry, scared, and confused all at once. In 22 years of military service, he had never felt this way. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a few minutes. He needed to calm down before going inside. His wife would know immediately that something was wrong. He did not want to worry her, but he also knew he could not hide this from her. He walked into the house. His wife was in the kitchen making dinner. She turned around and smiled, but her smile faded when she saw his face. "What happened?" she asked immediately. She walked over to him and saw the red marks on his wrists. "Were you in an accident?" The colonel shook his head. Then everything poured out. He told her about the traffic stop, the yelling, the handcuffs, the threats. His wife listened with growing horror. By the time he finished, she had tears in her eyes. "We need to report this," she said firmly. "This is not right. You need to file a complaint." "I will," he promised. "But right now I just need to sit down." While the colonel was home trying to process what happened, the woman from the gas station was uploading her video. Her name was Sarah, and she was a teacher at the local elementary school. She had never posted anything controversial on social media before, but she knew this video was important. She opened her laptop and reviewed the footage first. The video quality was good. The audio was clear. Everything that happened was documented. She watched the part where the officer threatened the colonel with pepper spray and the taser. She watched the part where the colonel, in his military uniform, was handcuffed and searched. She watched the officer's face as he made that chilling statement. "Yeah, you should be afraid." But there was one more part Sarah had not focused on during the actual incident. About halfway through the encounter, when the colonel was still in handcuffs, the lead officer had made another comment. Sarah had been so focused on recording that she had not fully processed what he said. But now, listening to it again on her laptop, she understood how serious it was. The officer had muttered something under his breath, but the phone microphone caught it clearly. It was a comment about the colonel's race. It was spoken quietly, almost to himself, but it was undeniably racist. The words made Sarah's stomach turn. This was not just a case of aggressive policing. This was discrimination, caught on camera. Sarah wrote a caption for the video. "Army Colonel terrorized during traffic stop. This happened tonight at the gas station on Main Street. He did nothing wrong. He was respectful and cooperative the entire time." The officers never gave him a clear reason for the stop. Please watch and share so people know what happened. She posted the video on her social media page at 9:47 p.m. Then she sent it to a few friends and asked them to share it. She also sent it to a local news reporter whose email she found on the news station's website. For the first hour, nothing happened. The video got a few views from Sarah's friends. Some people shared it, but it did not spread far. Sarah went to bed thinking maybe nothing would come of it. But social media works in mysterious ways. Around midnight, someone with a large following found the video and shared it. That person had 100,000 followers. Suddenly, thousands of people were watching. They were shocked by what they saw. They started sharing it with their own followers. By 2 a.m., the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By 6 a.m., it had reached 1 million views. By the time most people woke up for work on Wednesday morning, the video had been seen by over 5 million people. The local news station that Sarah had emailed ran the story on their morning broadcast. A disturbing video shows a decorated Army colonel being detained during a traffic stop. "We want to warn you. Some of the content is upsetting," the news anchor said before playing clips from the video. National news picked it up by noon. The video played on cable news shows. Reporters stood outside the police station asking for comments. The police chief was called out of a meeting to deal with the growing crisis. On social media, the video continued to spread. People from all over the country were watching it. Military veterans were especially vocal. They could not believe one of their own had been treated this way. "This man served our country for over 2 decades, one retired general tweeted. "He deserves respect, not to be terrorized by the people he fought to protect." Civil rights organizations issued statements. "This video shows the reality that many people face during police encounters," one organization wrote. "But it is especially disturbing because even a uniform, even decades of service, even respect and cooperation were not enough to prevent this abuse." The hashtag #EarJusticeForTheColonel started trending. Even though Sarah's video had not included the colonel's name to protect his privacy, people called him that because his rank was visible on his uniform. Legal experts appeared on news shows to analyze the video. "This is a textbook case of a bad traffic stop," one former prosecutor said. The officers never articulated a clear violation. They gave contradictory commands. They escalated when there was no need to escalate. And that comment about the license plate being improperly displayed? We can all see in the video that the plates are perfectly visible and legal. Another expert pointed out the racist comment. That statement alone could be grounds for termination and a civil rights lawsuit, she explained. Police officers cannot treat people differently based on race. That is a violation of the Constitution. The town's police department released a brief statement Wednesday afternoon. "We are aware of the video circulating on social media. The incident is under review. Our officers followed proper procedures during the traffic stop. We stand by our officers." This statement only made things worse. People were furious that the department was defending the officers instead of apologizing or promising an investigation. The comment section under the police department's statement filled with angry responses. "Proper procedures? Did we watch the same video?" One person wrote, "This is exactly why people don't trust police. You clearly did wrong and you still won't admit it," another commented. By Thursday morning, the video had been viewed over 20 million times. It had been shared on every social media platform. News outlets from other countries were covering the story. The small Virginia town was suddenly known around the world, and not for good reasons. Protesters started gathering outside the police station. They carried signs that said "Justice for the Colonel" and "End police racism," and "We saw what you did." Local residents who had never protested before came out. They were embarrassed that their town was being shown in such a negative light. The colonel himself still had not made any public statement. His phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, lawyers, and activists. His email inbox was flooded. People from his past reached out, old Army friends who had seen the video and wanted to make sure he was okay. The military was watching too. The base commander called the colonel personally. "We have your back," he said. "Whatever you need, we are here, and we are considering our own response to this situation." The colonel appreciated the support, but he felt overwhelmed. He had never asked for any of this attention. He just wanted to drive home from work. Now his face was all over the news. His worst moment was being watched by millions of people. His wife held his hand as they sat together watching the news coverage. "You did not do anything wrong," she reminded him. "You were professional and respectful the entire time. That video proves it." "I know," he said quietly, "but it still happened. Even though I did everything right, it still happened." That was the heart of the issue. The video showed something that many people claimed did not exist anymore. It showed that doing everything right, being respectful, serving your country, wearing a uniform were not always enough. Some people would still see only skin color and make judgments based on that. By Friday, lawyers were calling the colonel with offers to represent him for free. Civil rights organizations wanted to file lawsuits. Politicians were making statements about police reform and using his case as an example. The video kept spreading. It was shared in group chats, posted on message boards, discussed in classrooms. Teachers used it to talk about civil rights and police accountability. Parents showed it to their teenagers and talked about what to do if they were ever pulled over. The colonel finally hired a lawyer, one of the best civil rights attorneys in the state. They had a long meeting about what came next. The lawyer explained that they could file a federal lawsuit for violation of civil rights. They could demand reforms in the police department. They could push for the officers to be fired. But first, the lawyer said, "We need to let the investigation play out. The more they defend this, the stronger our case becomes." The video had done what the colonel could not do alone. It had shown the truth. Millions of witnesses had now seen exactly what happened that night. There could be no denying it, no explaining it away, no claiming it was anything other than what it clearly was. The viral moment had arrived, and everything was about to change. The weekend after the video went viral was chaotic. The small Virginia town had never seen anything like it. News trucks lined the streets around the police station. Reporters from New York, Los Angeles, and even international news organizations set up cameras. The town had about 15,000 residents, and suddenly everyone was talking about what happened. The protests grew larger each day. On Saturday, over 500 people gathered in front of the police station. They were not all from the town. People drove in from neighboring cities and states. They held signs and chanted. Some veterans came in their old military uniforms to show solidarity with the colonel. It was peaceful, but it was loud, and it could not be ignored. Inside the police station, officers watched the protesters through the windows. Some felt defensive. They believed the video did not show the full story. Others felt uncomfortable. They had seen the video too, and they knew it looked bad. A few privately thought the lead officer had gone too far, but they would not say it out loud. Police culture often meant staying loyal to each other, even when someone made a mistake. The police chief held a press conference on Saturday afternoon. He was a man in his 50s who had been chief for 12 years. He stood behind a podium with microphones from 24 news organizations. Cameras flashed as he read from a prepared statement. "I want to assure the community that we take all complaints seriously," he said. "The officers involved in the traffic stop have been placed on administrative leave while we conduct a full internal review. We are committed to transparency and accountability." Reporters immediately shouted questions. "Chief, the video shows the officer making a racist comment. Will he be fired? What traffic violation justified this stop? Why did your initial statement defend the officers?" The chief held up his hand. "I cannot comment on an ongoing investigation. But I want to be clear that we do not tolerate discrimination of any kind in this department." A reporter pushed harder. "But the video shows discrimination." "It is right there. What more do you need to see?" The chief's face reddened. "I have said what I can say at this time. Thank you." He left the podium quickly and went back inside the building. The reporters kept shouting questions at his back. The press conference did not help. If anything, it made people angrier. Social media exploded with criticism of the chief's vague answers. People wanted clear action, not promises of an investigation. By Sunday, the story had expanded beyond just the traffic stop. Reporters started digging into the police department's history. They requested records of previous complaints against officers. They looked at data on traffic stops to see if there were patterns of discrimination. What they found was troubling. A local newspaper published a major investigation on Sunday evening. They had reviewed 5 years of traffic stop data from the town. The numbers showed a clear pattern. Black drivers were pulled over at a rate 3 times higher than their percentage of the population. They were more likely to be searched. They were more likely to be arrested, even when no contraband was found. The investigation also revealed something shocking about the lead officer from the video. His name was Officer Derek Thompson. He had been with the department for 8 years. In that time, he had received 17 formal complaints. Most were for excessive force or unprofessional conduct. Several specifically mentioned racial bias, yet he had never been seriously disciplined. He had received some written warnings, but he kept his job and his badge. Even more troubling, the town had paid out settlements in 3 lawsuits involving Officer Thompson. The total was over $200,000. In each case, the settlement included a confidentiality agreement, which meant the public never knew about them. The town's lawyers had advised paying the settlements quietly, rather than fighting them in court where more attention would be drawn to the officer's conduct. When this information became public, the outrage intensified. People could not understand how an officer with 17 complaints and 3 lawsuits was still on the street. How had no one stopped him before this? How many other people had he mistreated who never got their story on video? Civil rights organizations announced they were filing a federal lawsuit on Monday morning. The lawsuit named Officer Thompson, his partner, the police chief, and the town itself. It accused them of violating the colonel's constitutional rights. It also demanded systemic changes in the department, including better training, independent oversight, and a ban on officers with extensive complaint histories. The lawyer representing the colonel held his own press conference. She was a woman named Amanda Richardson, known for winning major civil rights cases. She stood confidently in front of the cameras. "What happened to my client is unacceptable," she began. "He is a decorated military officer who has served this country for 22 years. He has been to war. He has led soldiers in combat. Yet he was terrorized during a routine traffic stop for no reason other than the color of his skin." She paused and looked directly into the cameras. "But this is not just about my client. This is about a pattern of behavior in this police department. This is about an officer who should have been removed from duty years ago. This is about a system that protected a bad officer and ignored warning signs until finally, someone caught it on video." The lawsuit demanded monetary damages, but Richardson made it clear that money was not the primary goal. "My client wants accountability. He wants to make sure this never happens to anyone else. He wants real change, not just empty promises." The lawyer also announced that the colonel would give his first public interview later that week. Until now, he had remained silent. But he felt it was time to tell his story in his own words. Political leaders started weighing in. The state's governor issued a statement calling the video deeply disturbing and promising a state-level investigation. The mayor of the town found himself in an impossible position. He had to maintain order in his community while addressing the legitimate anger people felt. He scheduled a town hall meeting for Tuesday night. The town hall was packed. The meeting room at City Hall could hold 200 people, but over 400 showed up. Many had to stand outside and listen through speakers. The mayor, police chief, and several town council members sat on stage facing the angry crowd. Person after person stood up to speak. Some were residents who had their own stories of mistreatment by police. Others were veterans who felt betrayed that one of their own had been treated this way. Some were just concerned citizens who wanted answers. An elderly black man stood up. His voice shook with emotion. "I have lived in this town for 40 years. I raised my children here, and I have been pulled over more times than I can count for no reason. I have been asked where I am going, where I work, if this is my car. I am 73 years old, and I am still afraid every time I see police lights behind me. When will this end?" A young white woman spoke next. "I watched that video and I was horrified. But I also realized something. I have never been treated that way by police ever. I have been pulled over for speeding and the officer was always polite. He explained what I did wrong, gave me a ticket, and let me go. No yelling, no handcuffs, no threats. Why? What is the difference between me and the colonel? We both broke traffic laws, but we were treated completely differently." The stories went on for 3 hours. The mayor and police chief mostly listened. There was not much they could say that would satisfy the crowd. The anger in the room was real, and it had been building for years. The colonel's video had simply brought it all to the surface. Meanwhile, the video continued to spread. It had now been viewed over 50 million times. News analysis shows played it repeatedly. Experts broke down every second, pointing out all the mistakes the officers made. A former police chief from a major city appeared on a national news show. "This is a training failure," he explained. "These officers escalated when they should have de-escalated. They gave confusing commands. They showed aggression when there was no threat. Everything about this stop violated best practices. The host asked, "What about the racist comment?" The former chief shook his head. "That is beyond a training failure. That is a character failure. That officer should not be in law enforcement. Period." Support for the colonel came from unexpected places. Conservative politicians who usually defended police in these situations spoke out. "I support law enforcement," one senator said, "but I also support the Constitution. This video shows a clear violation of this man's rights. He deserves justice." Military organizations rallied around the colonel. The veterans of foreign wars issued a strong statement. "When you put on the uniform, you swear to support and defend the Constitution. Our brother did that for over 2 decades. He should not have to fear the people he served to protect." The pressure on the town and the police department became overwhelming. The mayor announced that they were hiring an independent investigator to review not just this incident, but the entire department's practices. The police union immediately opposed this, saying their officers were being unfairly targeted. By the end of the first week after the video went viral, the story had become a national conversation about police reform, systemic racism, and accountability. The colonel's case was mentioned in Congress. Activists used it as an example of why change was needed. 2 weeks after the video went viral, the state attorney general announced that her office would conduct a formal investigation. This was significant. It meant the investigation would not be handled by the local police department or even local prosecutors. The state was taking over. The attorney general's name was Patricia Martinez. She was a former prosecutor known for taking on difficult cases. She held a press conference to explain what her investigation would look for. "We will be examining whether civil rights violations occurred during this traffic stop," she said. "We will also be looking at patterns and practices within the police department. Were there warning signs that were ignored? Were proper procedures followed? Was there adequate training and supervision?" She emphasized that her investigation would be thorough and independent. "We will let the facts lead us wherever they go. If we find evidence of criminal wrongdoing, we will prosecute. If we find systemic problems, we will demand reforms." The police department was required to turn over all records related to Officer Thompson and his partner. This included personnel files, training records, previous complaints, body camera footage from other incidents, and internal emails and communications. The Attorney General's investigators worked long hours reviewing thousands of pages of documents. What they found painted a disturbing picture. Officer Thompson's personnel file showed a history of problems dating back to his first year on the force. His field training officer had noted that he had difficulty controlling his temper and showed bias in his interactions with minority citizens. Despite these warnings, he was approved to work on his own. Over the next 7 years, the complaints piled up. A black teenager said Thompson slammed him against a car for no reason. A Hispanic woman said he called her names during a traffic stop. An Asian man said Thompson searched his car aggressively and left his belongings scattered on the street. In each case, the department's Internal Affairs Division investigated and found insufficient evidence to sustain the complaints. But there were patterns the department should have noticed. Thompson made 3 times as many traffic stops of minority drivers compared to other officers. He was involved in use of force incidents far more often than his peers. Multiple citizens had accused him of racial bias, yet he received only minor discipline, usually just a written warning telling him to be more professional. The investigators also found something shocking in the department's emails. After one complaint was filed against Thompson, his supervisor wrote to the chief, "Thompson is a good cop who is aggressive. That's what we need on the street. These complainants just don't like being held accountable." This email revealed the department's mindset. They saw Thompson's aggressive behavior as a positive trait rather than a problem. They dismissed complaints as people not liking to be held accountable, rather than legitimate concerns about misconduct. The investigation also looked at Officer Thompson's partner, the younger officer who had been with him during the colonel's stop. His name was Officer James Murphy. He had been on the force for only 3 years. His record was much cleaner, but investigators found troubling information in his training records. Officer Murphy had expressed concerns during his field training about some of the tactics more senior officers used. He wrote in one training report that he felt uncomfortable with how some traffic stops were conducted and that he worried about profiling. His training officer wrote back that he needed to stop being soft and trust his fellow officers. This showed that even when a newer officer saw problems, the department culture pressured him to stay quiet. By the time of the colonel's traffic stop, Murphy had learned to keep his mouth shut and follow the lead of senior officers, even when they were doing something wrong. The state investigation also examined the 3 previous settlements the town had paid related to Officer Thompson. The files had been sealed, but investigators had the power to unseal them. What they found was damning. In the first case, Thompson had pulled over a black man and became aggressive when the man asked why he was being stopped. Thompson pepper-sprayed him and charged him with resisting arrest. The charges were later dropped when video from a nearby business showed the man never resisted. He sued and settled for $75,000. In the second case, Thompson stopped a car with 3 Hispanic teenagers. He ordered them out at gunpoint, searched them all, and found nothing illegal. The teenagers' parents sued for unlawful detention and harassment. The town settled for $50,000. In the third case, Thompson made a traffic stop that resulted in a physical altercation. The driver, a black woman, ended up with a broken wrist. She claimed Thompson grabbed her arm and twisted it violently. Thompson claimed she tried to hit him first. The case settled for $80,000 before going to trial. In all 3 cases, the town's insurance company recommended settling rather than going to trial. They knew these cases would look bad in front of a jury. The town's lawyers agreed, so the cases were settled with confidentiality agreements, and Thompson went back to work with no real consequences. The pattern was clear. The department knew Thompson was a problem, but they did nothing meaningful to stop him. They hoped the settlements would make the issues go away quietly. Instead, they just enabled him to keep behaving the same way. While the state investigation continued, the colonel's civil lawsuit moved forward. His lawyer, Amanda Richardson, filed discovery requests demanding even more documents. She wanted to see everything, every complaint against every officer, all training materials, all policies and procedures. The town tried to fight some of these requests, claiming they were too broad. But the federal judge overseeing the case disagreed. This lawsuit raises serious questions about department-wide practices, the judge wrote in her order. The plaintiff is entitled to this information to prove his case. The discovery process revealed more problems. The police department's training on bias and de-escalation was minimal. Officers received just 2 hours of training per year on these topics. The rest of their training focused on tactics and use of force. The department also had no early warning system to identify problem officers. In many modern police departments, supervisors track metrics like complaints, use of force incidents, and traffic stop demographics. When an officer shows a pattern of problems, they receive additional supervision or training. This department had no such system. Supervisors simply did not track these issues. Richardson held another press conference to share what she had learned. What we have uncovered is a police department that was willfully blind to problems within its ranks, she explained. They had all the warning signs they needed. Multiple complaints, lawsuits, and settlements should have been red flags, but they ignored them all. She held up a thick stack of papers. These are just some of the complaints against Officer Thompson, 17 and 8 years. That is more than 2 per year. The average officer might get 1 or 2 complaints in their entire career. This officer averaged 2 per year, and nobody thought that was a problem worth addressing. The public reaction was intense. People could not understand how such obvious failures had been allowed to continue. Parents worried about what kind of police force was patrolling their streets. Minority residents felt vindicated, their complaints taken seriously for the first time. The police union defended their members but was clearly on the defensive. The union president gave an interview saying, "Police work is difficult. Officers make split-second decisions in dangerous situations. They deserve the benefit of the doubt." But critics pointed out this was not a split-second decision. The colonel's traffic stop lasted over 40 minutes. Thompson had plenty of time to calm down, to realize he had made a mistake, to de-escalate. He chose not to. 6 weeks into the state investigation, Officer Thompson's lawyer announced that his client would resign from the police force. The statement said Thompson was resigning to focus on his family and to avoid being a distraction to the department. It did not admit any wrongdoing, many. People saw this as Thompson trying to escape before he could be fired. If he resigned, he might be able to work as a police officer somewhere else. Some states allowed officers to simply move to a different department when they got in trouble, a practice critics called wandering officers. But Amanda Richardson had anticipated this. She worked with state legislators to introduce a bill that would create a statewide database of police misconduct. Any officer fired or who resigned during a misconduct investigation would be listed in the database. Other departments would be required to check the database before hiring any officer. The investigation also revealed problems with Officer Murphy, Thompson's partner. While Murphy had not initiated the aggressive behavior, he had gone along with it. He had drawn his weapon. He had helped search the colonel's car. He had stood by while Thompson made racist comments. The Attorney General's office concluded that Murphy should face discipline but not criminal charges. He was suspended without pay for 6 months and required to undergo extensive retraining before returning to duty. The police chief announced his retirement 2 months after the incident. He claimed it was planned and had nothing to do with the controversy. But everyone knew the truth. The chief had lost the confidence of the community and his own officers. He had failed to manage his department properly, and now his legacy was forever tied to this scandal. The Attorney General's final report was released 3 months after the traffic stop. It was 147 pages long and devastating in its findings. The report concluded that Officer Thompson had violated the colonel's civil rights through racial profiling and excessive force. It also found that the police department had a culture that enabled misconduct and failed to hold officers accountable. The report made several recommendations. The department needed independent oversight, better training, an early warning system for problem officers, and a complete review of its policies and procedures. The report also recommended that all officers undergo bias training conducted by outside experts. Most significantly, the report recommended that the case be referred to federal prosecutors for possible criminal civil rights charges against Officer Thompson. Federal civil rights charges carried serious penalties, including potential prison time. The Attorney General spoke at a press conference releasing the report.
"What happened to the colonel should never happen to anyone," she said.
This investigation has shown us that one bad officer, enabled by a failed system, can do tremendous damage. But it has also shown us the path forward. With proper oversight, training, and accountability, we can do better. We must do better. The colonel attended the press conference. He sat in the front row with his wife beside him. When reporters asked for his reaction, he stood and spoke briefly. "I am grateful for this thorough investigation," he said. "The truth has come out. Now we need action. Reports and recommendations are important, but they mean nothing without real change. I hope this town and police departments everywhere will learn from this and make the changes needed to serve and protect all citizens equally." The investigation had revealed the truth. The system had failed, but the question remained, would anything actually change? 6 months after the traffic stop, the colonel's civil rights lawsuit reached a critical moment. A preliminary hearing was scheduled before Judge Patricia Williams at the federal courthouse. This hearing would determine whether the case would move forward to trial or be dismissed. Judge Williams had a reputation. She had been a federal judge for 15 years and was known for not tolerating nonsense in her courtroom. She was fair but firm. Lawyers who came unprepared or tried to play games with her learned quickly that she would not have it. She was African American, in her early 60s, and had grown up in the South during the civil rights movement. She understood injustice personally. The courtroom was packed on the morning of the hearing. Members of the media filled the gallery. Civil rights activists sat together wearing shirts with the colonel's military rank. Some veterans came in their dress uniforms to show support. The colonel sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, Amanda Richardson. He wore his army dress uniform, all his medals and ribbons displayed on his chest. At the defense table sat lawyers representing Officer Thompson, Officer Murphy, the former police chief, and the town itself. They had expensive suits and leather briefcases. They looked confident, ready to argue that their clients had done nothing wrong. Judge Williams entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. She was shorter than many people expected, but she commanded the room with her presence. She took her seat behind the bench and looked over her reading glasses at the packed courtroom. "Please be seated," she said. Her voice was strong and clear. We are here for a preliminary hearing in the case of John Doe versus Thompson and others. I have reviewed the complaint and the motions filed by both sides. I am ready to hear arguments. The defense went first. Their lead attorney was a man named Robert Harrison. He was from a large firm that specialized in defending police officers. He stood and buttoned his suit jacket. "Your Honor, this case should be dismissed," he began. The officers in question were conducting a lawful traffic stop. They followed their training. They had reason to believe the plaintiff might pose a threat, so they took precautions. The plaintiff was not harmed. He was briefly detained and then released. This does not rise to the level of a constitutional violation. Judge Williams looked at him without expression. "Counselor, have you watched the video that is at the center of this case?" "Yes, Your Honor, I have." "And do you still maintain that the officers followed proper procedures?" "Yes, Your Honor. The video does not show the complete picture. It does not show what the officers observed before they made the stop." Judge Williams leaned back in her chair. "What did they observe?" Harrison shuffled his papers. The vehicle was traveling in a high-crime area. The driver made several turns that appeared evasive. "Several turns?" Judge Williams asked. "The report shows he drove straight down Main Street and then turned into a well-lit gas station when the police lights came on." "Where are these several turns?" Harrison paused. "I misspoke, Your Honor. He made one turn into the gas station rather than pulling over immediately on the road." "And that is evasive?" Judge Williams asked. "The plaintiff has testified, and it is visible on the video, that he pulled into a well-lit public area for safety. Is that not actually recommended practice?" "It can be interpreted as suspicious behavior," Harrison argued. Judge Williams made a note. "Continue." Harrison went on to argue that the officers had the right to conduct the stop the way they did. He claimed the plaintiff's detention was brief and reasonable. He suggested the racist comment caught on video was just a poor choice of words and not evidence of actual bias. "Officers are human," Harrison said. "They sometimes say things in the heat of the moment that they do not mean. We cannot judge an entire encounter based on one statement." When Harrison finished, Judge Williams turned to Amanda Richardson. "Counselor, your response?" Richardson stood. She pressed a button on her laptop and the video began playing on the courtroom monitors. Judge Williams had seen it before, but she ordered it played again. The room fell silent except for the audio from that night. Everyone watched the colonel's hands on the steering wheel. They heard the officer's aggressive commands. They saw the confusion on the colonel's face as he tried to comply. They heard the threats about pepper spray and the taser. They saw him placed in handcuffs. And they heard crystal clear the racist comment that revealed the true nature of the stop. When the video ended, Richardson spoke. "Your Honor, that is what happened. Not what the defense claims happened, but what actually happened, captured on video by an independent witness. The plaintiff did nothing wrong. He committed no traffic violation. He was respectful and cooperative. Yet he was terrorized." She walked closer to the bench. "Defense counsel says the officers followed their training. If that is true, then the training is the problem. Defense counsel says this was a brief detention. 43 minutes with guns drawn and hands in handcuffs is not brief. Defense counsel says the racist comment was just poor word choice. Your Honor, racism is not a word choice problem. It is a violation of constitutional rights." Judge Williams looked at the defense table. "Counselor Harrison, you mentioned the plaintiff made a turn into the gas station, and that was suspicious. What about the fact that he is wearing a military uniform clearly visible in the video?" "The officers may not have noticed the uniform immediately," Harrison replied. "For 43 minutes?" Judge Williams asked. "At some point, surely they noticed. Did that change how they behaved?" Harrison had no good answer. "I cannot speak to what the officers were thinking at every moment." "No, but we have the video," Judge Williams said. "And I can see what happened. The uniform made no difference to these officers. Neither did the plaintiff's respectful behavior. Neither did the fact that he was clearly not a threat." She turned to the documents in front of her. "I have also reviewed the State Attorney General's investigation report. I have seen Officer Thompson's history of complaints. I have seen the settlements the town paid to avoid trials. This is not a case of one mistake by one officer on one night. This is a pattern." Judge Williams removed her glasses and looked directly at the defense attorneys. "Here is what I see. I see a decorated military officer who served this country for over 2 decades. I see him driving home from work in his uniform. I see him pulled over for no legitimate reason. I see officers who immediately escalated instead of having a simple conversation. I see contradictory commands that created confusion and danger. I see the use of handcuffs and drawn weapons against an unarmed man who posed no threat. And I see and hear clear evidence of racial bias. She paused and let her words sink in. What I do not see is any justification for how these officers behaved. What I do not hear from the defense is any acknowledgement that something went terribly wrong that night. Harrison tried to interrupt. Your Honor, if I may— No, you may not, Judge Williams said firmly. I am not finished. You had your turn to speak. She looked at the town's lawyer. Your client paid out over $200,000 in settlements related to Officer Thompson before this incident. Your client had 17 complaints against this officer on file. Your client knew, or should have known, that this officer was a problem, yet nothing was done. Now you come into my courtroom and ask me to dismiss this case? On what grounds? That the video does not show what we can all clearly see? The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the reporters stopped writing to listen. Judge Williams continued. I want answers. Not the answers in your briefs that dance around the issues. Real answers. How was Officer Thompson trained? What did his training teach him about de-escalation? About bias? About respecting citizens' rights? She looked at the former police chief who was sitting behind the defense table. Chief, you are named as a defendant in this case because you supervise this department. You are responsible for the officers under your command. You had complaints about Officer Thompson going back years. You had settlements being paid because of his conduct. What did you do about it? The chief's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Williams stopped him. I am not asking you, counselor. I am asking him. He can answer or not, but I want him to understand my questions. The former chief looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. His lawyer had clearly told him not to speak. Judge Williams nodded. I see. You choose to say nothing. That is your right, but your silence speaks volumes. She gathered her papers and looked at both legal teams. Here is my ruling. This case will not be dismissed. There is more than enough evidence to proceed to trial. In fact, there is overwhelming evidence that constitutional violations occurred. The defense table erupted in whispers. Harrison stood again. Your Honor, we request— Denied, Judge Williams said before he could finish. Whatever you are about to request is denied. You had a chance to settle this case quietly. You chose to defend the indefensible instead. She turned to Amanda Richardson. Counselor, your client deserves his day in court. But more than that, this community deserves answers and accountability. I am going to order something unusual in this case. In addition to the trial on damages, I am going to require a full accounting of the police department's practices. She looked at the town's lawyer. I want a comprehensive report on every policy, every training program, every complaint, and every disciplinary action in your police department for the past 10 years. I want to know how many other people were treated the way this plaintiff was treated. I want to know what systemic problems exist. And I want a plan for how you are going to fix them. The town's lawyer looked shocked. Your Honor, that is extraordinarily burdensome. Good, Judge Williams said. Perhaps the burden will motivate real change. You have 60 days to produce that report. If you fail to comply, I will hold your client in contempt. She turned back to Richardson. Counselor, I am also going to order mediation before trial. Both sides will meet with a federal mediator to attempt to reach a settlement. That settlement must include not just monetary damages, but real reforms. I want to see commitment to change, not just a check to make this go away. Richardson nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. My client wants accountability and reform above all else. I know he does, Judge Williams said. I read his statement. He is a better person than many of us, willing to turn his trauma into an opportunity for positive change. She looked at the colonel directly. Sir, thank you for your service to this country, and thank you for your courage in pursuing this case. It would have been easier to take a quiet settlement and move on. Instead, you are standing up not just for yourself, but for everyone who might face similar treatment in the future. That is the mark of a true leader. The colonel nodded, emotion visible on his face. Judge Williams banged her gavel. This hearing is concluded. We will reconvene in 60 days to review the compliance report. Dismissed. As everyone stood and Judge Williams left the courtroom, the colonel felt something he had not felt in months. Hope. Real hope that justice might actually be served. The 60 days after Judge Williams' hearing passed quickly. The town scrambled to compile the report she demanded. Teams of lawyers and consultants worked long hours reviewing files, analyzing data, and preparing documentation. What they found in their own records shocked even them. When the report was delivered to the court, it was over 300 pages long. It detailed systemic failures that went back more than a decade. The data showed clear patterns of discrimination in traffic stops, searches, and arrests. The training programs were inadequate. The oversight was almost non-existent. The early warning systems that should have flagged problem officers did not exist. The report also revealed something the public had not known. Officer Thompson was not the only problem officer in the department. 3 other officers had complaint histories almost as extensive. They too had continued working with minimal discipline. The culture of the department protected officers who should have been removed years ago. Judge Williams scheduled another hearing to review the report. This time, the courtroom was even more packed than before. The case had become a symbol of something much larger than one traffic stop. It represented a moment of reckoning for how police departments operated. The judge entered and everyone stood. She sat down and immediately addressed the town's lawyers. I have reviewed your report. It confirms what many of us suspected. This department had serious systemic problems that were ignored for years. The question now is what will be done about it. The town's lead lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client acknowledges the issues identified in the report. The town is committed to making changes. What changes specifically? Judge Williams asked. The lawyer outlined a plan. The police department would hire an independent oversight board made up of community members. All officers would undergo 40 hours of new training on bias, de-escalation, and constitutional rights. Body cameras would become mandatory for all officers. An early warning system would be implemented to track officer behavior. Any officer with more than 3 sustained complaints in a year would face automatic review and possible removal. Judge Williams listened carefully. That is a start, but I want more specifics. Who will serve on this oversight board? What power will they have? Will they be able to review complaints independently? Will they have access to all department records? The lawyer consulted with his clients. We are still working out those details, Your Honor. Work faster, Judge Williams said. I want a detailed implementation plan within 30 days. I also want regular progress reports. This court will maintain oversight of this case until I am satisfied that real change has occurred. She turned to the mediation that had been ordered. The 2 sides had met multiple times over the past 2 months. The mediator reported that they were close to reaching a settlement agreement. Amanda Richardson stood to explain the terms. Your Honor, we have reached an agreement in principle. The town will pay my client $1.5 million in damages. But more importantly, the town has agreed to the reforms we demanded. These include everything the court has already discussed, plus additional measures. She outlined the additional reforms. Every officer would be required to complete annual bias training from an independent organization that specialized in police reform. The department would participate in a national database of police misconduct, so officers could not simply move to another department after being fired. The department would implement a community policing model that emphasized building relationships with residents rather than aggressive enforcement. And critically, Officer Thompson would never work in law enforcement again anywhere in the state. The State Law Enforcement Commission has agreed to revoke his certification permanently, Richardson explained. He cannot simply go to another town and become a problem there. Judge Williams nodded approvingly. What about Officer Murphy? Officer Murphy will remain suspended for 6 months without pay, Richardson said. After that, he can return to duty only if he completes extensive retraining and maintains a clean record for 2 years. Any sustained complaint during that probationary period will result in immediate termination. Judge Williams looked at Officer Murphy, who sat in the gallery. Officer Murphy, do you understand these terms? Murphy stood. Yes, Your Honor. Do you agree to them? Yes, Your Honor. I do. His voice was quiet, and he looked genuinely remorseful. I want to say something if I may. Judge Williams gestured for him to continue. Murphy took a deep breath. I have thought about that night every single day for the past 6 months. I was wrong. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped what was happening. I did not, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. I understand why I'm being punished, and I accept it. I want to be a better officer. I want to do right by this community. If given a second chance, I will prove that I learned from this. The courtroom was silent. Judge Williams studied him for a moment. Officer Murphy, most people never get a chance to make things right after a serious mistake. You are getting that chance. Do not waste it. I won't, Your Honor. I promise. Judge Williams then addressed the former police chief. Chief, you have resigned, so these reforms do not directly affect you. But I want you to understand something. You failed in your duty to supervise your officers and protect your community. Your failure enabled Officer Thompson to hurt people for years. You could have stopped it, but you chose not to. I hope you carry that knowledge with you. The former chief nodded but said nothing. Finally, Judge Williams turned to the colonel. Sir, would you like to address the court? The colonel stood. He had prepared remarks, but he decided to speak from his heart instead. Your Honor, 6 months ago I was just trying to drive home from work. What happened that night changed my life. It was traumatic. It was humiliating. It made me question things I had never questioned before. He paused, gathering his emotions, but I decided I could not let that night define me or defeat me. I had to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who has experienced something similar, but did not have video evidence, for everyone who was not believed, for everyone who felt powerless against a system that was supposed to protect them. He looked at the defense table. I do not hate Officer Thompson. I pity him. He let his biases and his anger control him. He hurt people, including himself. I hope he gets help and becomes a better person. Then he looked at Officer Murphy. Officer Murphy, I accept your apology. I believe you are sincere. I hope you do become a better officer. We need good officers who will stand up and do the right thing even when it is hard. He turned back to Judge Williams. Your Honor, this case was never about money for me. It was about accountability and change. I am grateful that we have achieved both. I am grateful for your leadership in demanding real reforms. I hope other communities will look at what happened here and make changes before something like this happens to them. His voice grew stronger. I am still proud to be an American. I am still proud to wear this uniform. But I am also committed to making this country better, more fair, more just. That is what my service has always been about. And that commitment does not end just because I am not in a war zone anymore. The fight for justice happens here at home too. When he finished, the courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Williams did not stop it. She let the moment happen. After a minute, she gently banged her gavel. Thank you, sir, she said. Your words are a reminder of why we do this work. Justice is not just about punishing wrongdoing. It is about making things better for everyone. She looked at all the parties. I am going to approve this settlement with one modification. I want the town to create a memorial scholarship in honor of this case. It will be called the Justice and Service Scholarship. It will go to a local high school student each year who demonstrates commitment to both community service and equal justice. The town will fund it for at least 20 years. The town's lawyer nodded. We agree, Your Honor. Good, Judge Williams said. Now let me be very clear about something. This court will be watching. I will receive quarterly reports on the implementation of these reforms for the next 3 years. If I see backsliding, if I see resistance, if I see any indication that these reforms are not being taken seriously, I will bring everyone back here and we will have a very different conversation. She looked at the community members in the gallery. This is your police department. These reforms will only work if you hold your leaders accountable. Attend city council meetings. Ask questions. Demand transparency. Do not let this moment pass without lasting change. Judge Williams banged her gavel one final time. The settlement is approved. This case is resolved. Court is adjourned. As people filed out of the courtroom, the colonel was surrounded by supporters. Veterans shook his hand. Civil rights activists hugged him. Reporters asked for interviews. Through it all, he remained humble and gracious. Outside the courthouse, Amanda Richardson held a press conference. Today is a good day for justice, she said. My client stood up against a system that wronged him, and he won. But more importantly, this community won. They are getting the police reforms they deserved long ago. A reporter asked, "What message does this send to other police departments?" "The message is simple," Richardson replied. "You will be held accountable. You cannot hide behind qualified immunity or internal investigations. When you violate people's rights, there will be consequences. And thanks to brave people like my client who are willing to fight, those consequences are becoming more real every day." The colonel gave his own statement. "I hope this case inspires other people who have experienced injustice to speak up. I hope it shows that change is possible. It takes courage and it takes time, but it is possible. We can create a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their skin color. That is the America I fought for overseas. That is the America we must continue to fight for here at home." In the weeks that followed, the town began implementing the reforms. The oversight board was established with respected community leaders, including a retired judge, a college professor, and a local minister. The training programs were rolled out to all officers. Body cameras were installed and activated. The early warning system went live. Most significantly, the culture began to change. Officers who had gotten used to doing things the old way were put on notice. The community was watching now. The court was watching now. There was nowhere to hide. Other towns and cities across the country took notice. Some police departments voluntarily adopted similar reforms, not wanting to wait until they had their own viral video. State legislatures passed new laws on police accountability. The national conversation about policing shifted. Officer Thompson never worked in law enforcement again. He moved to another state and took a job in private security. He gave one interview months later where he claimed he was a victim of cancel culture. But few people had sympathy for him. The video showed the truth, and the truth was undeniable. Officer Murphy completed his suspension and retraining. When he returned to duty, he was a changed officer. He focused on community policing, building relationships with residents. He became an advocate within the department for the reforms. He often spoke to new recruits about his mistake and what he learned from it. He became living proof that people can change if they truly want to. The colonel returned to his work at the military base. His career continued, and he was later promoted. But he also became a sought-after speaker on issues of justice, leadership, and standing up for what is right. He traveled to military bases, police academies, and universities sharing his story. His message was always the same. Do not be silent when you see injustice. Do not go along just because it is easier. Have the courage to do what is right even when it is hard. That is what real leadership looks like. The scholarship established in his honor sent its first student to college the following year. The recipient was a young woman who had volunteered hundreds of hours at a legal aid clinic and wanted to become a civil rights lawyer. She wrote in her essay, "I want to help people like the colonel who have been wronged but do not give up fighting for justice." 5 years after the traffic stop, the town had been transformed. The police department was held up as a model for reform. Crime rates had actually decreased as community trust in police increased. Officers and residents worked together rather than viewing each other with suspicion. It was not perfect, but it was better. Judge Williams eventually retired from the bench. In her final interview, she was asked about the cases she was most proud of. She mentioned several, but she spent the most time talking about the colonel's case. "That case showed me why I became a judge," she said. "Justice is not just about applying the law. It is about having the courage to demand better from our institutions and from each other." That colonel could have taken a quick settlement and walked away. Instead, he fought for something bigger than himself. That is heroism, just as much as anything he did in uniform overseas. The colonel watched that interview from his living room. His children, now teenagers, sat with him. They had grown up with this story as part of their family history. It shaped how they saw the world and their responsibility to make it better. "Dad, are you glad you did it?" his daughter asked. "Was it worth all the stress and publicity?" The colonel thought for a moment. He remembered the fear he felt that night. He remembered the months of depositions, hearings, and media attention. He remembered the hate mail alongside the support. It had been one of the hardest experiences of his life. But then he thought about the changes that had happened. He thought, About the other people who might have been treated the same way if nothing had changed. He thought about Officer Murphy, who became a better officer. He thought about the scholarship students. He thought about all the police departments that reformed their practices. Yes, he said finally. It was worth it. It had to be done. And if I had to do it all over again, I would make the same choice. His daughter smiled. That is what makes you a hero, Dad. The colonel shook his head. I am not a hero. I just did what needed to be done. Real heroism is standing up for what is right when no one is watching. When there are no cameras, when it would be easier to stay silent. That is what I hope you kids will do in your own lives. And they did. The colonel's children grew up to be advocates and leaders in their own right. They carried forward the lessons they learned from their father's courage and from that terrible night that became a turning point for so many. The viral video that started it all remained online, viewed millions of times over the years. It became a teaching tool in police academies and law schools. It was a permanent reminder of what can go wrong when power is abused and what can go right when people demand accountability. The colonel sometimes watched it himself, though it never got easier to see. But he watched it to remember why the fight for justice never ends, to remember that change is possible, to remember that one person standing up can make a difference. The gas station where it all happened put up a small plaque. It read simply, "On this site, injustice was captured on camera, truth was revealed, and change began. May we never forget, and may we always do better." Every year on the anniversary of that night, the colonel visited the gas station. He stood in that parking lot and thought about how far things had come. He thought about how far they still needed to go. And he renewed his commitment to keep fighting, keep speaking up, keep demanding better. Because that is what service really means. Not just serving your country on a battlefield somewhere far away, but serving justice every day, in every interaction, in every moment when you have a choice between staying silent and speaking up. The colonel chose to speak up. And because he did, the world became a little bit more just.